Birthdays are supposed to remind a man of the life he's lived, the people who love him, the years he's earned. At 58, I didn't expect fireworks or gifts, just a quiet dinner with my daughter and her family. I'd raised her, provided for her, stood by her when the world felt unkind. All I wanted was a chair at her table and a piece of cake with my granddaughter's laughter nearby. Instead, I got words that cut deeper than any knife. We just finished dinner when my daughter cleared her throat. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad," she said, "we don't need you anymore." The room fell silent. My fork froze halfway to my plate. At first, I thought she was joking, maybe fumbling a toast. But the look on her face told me otherwise, tight, rehearsed, almost relieved to finally let it out. Her husband leaned back in his chair, smirking like a man who'd been waiting for this moment. My granddaughter kept playing with her toys, oblivious. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean, you don't need me?" She sighed. "You've done enough. You've been around. But it's time for you to stop hovering. We have our own life now. You don't need to be part of every decision, every dinner. Maybe it's time you focused on yourself." Focused on myself. As though being her father had been some side hobby, not the very reason I got up in the morning. I tried to laugh it off, to mask the sting. "Well," I said, my voice rough, "that's quite a birthday gift." But inside, something broke. Not loudly. Quietly, like the snap of an old beam under the weight of years. That night, I sat in my empty house, the cake still uneaten on the counter, her words echoing in my head. "We don't need you anymore." I thought about all the times I had sacrificed, missed promotions, sleepless nights, money tucked away to help her through school, the mortgage I paid off when she and her husband struggled. I thought of the love poured out over decades, now tossed aside like an old coat no one wants to wear. I didn't drink. I didn't cry. I just sat in silence, staring at the dark window until dawn broke. And when the first light touched the glass, I knew one thing for certain: if they didn't need me, then they didn't deserve me. The next day, everything began to change. The morning after my birthday, I woke to a stillness that felt heavier than usual. Sunlight cut through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor, but it didn't warm me. Her words still echoed in my ears: "We don't need you anymore." I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, staring at the same four walls I had lived in for decades. This house had been more than shelter, it had been the headquarters of sacrifice. Every paycheck, every decision, every long hour of work had circled back to one purpose: building a life for my daughter. And now? Now I was told my purpose was finished, like a worker laid off after years of loyal service. But here's the thing: when a man is stripped of his role, he either collapses, or he remembers who he really is. By noon, I had made my decision. I dug through the old desk drawer where I kept the files no one knew about. Bank statements. Investments. Property deeds. The quiet fortune I had built while everyone assumed I was just getting by. They saw the old truck, the worn shoes, the modest house, and they thought I was a man scraping pennies together. They never saw the discipline, the late night studying markets, the side jobs I poured into accounts under my own name. As I flipped through those papers, a calm spread through me. They didn't know who I really was, not anymore. My daughter thought I existed only to serve, to hover, to fade when no longer convenient. Her husband thought he could smirk and wait me out, as if I were a burden bound to disappear. They were wrong. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. I told him it was time to update the will, time to adjust the trust, time to shift everything I had worked for into places where gratitude still lived: friends, charities, even distant relatives who had shown more kindness in a single phone call than my daughter had in years. He asked me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. I gave her my life. She told me she doesn't need me. Now she'll find out what it really means to live without me. I hung up the phone, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since the birthday dinner, I felt peace. The revenge wasn't fire or fury. It was colder than that. It was the kind of revenge that didn't need shouting. It only needed patience. 2 days later, I decided to pay a visit, not to fight, not to explain myself, but to observe. I wanted to see how they behaved when they thought the conversation was finished, when they believed I'd simply shrink into the background like an old photograph fading on the wall. I knocked on their door in the early afternoon. My granddaughter was the one who opened it, her bright eyes lighting up as she ran to hug me. That moment nearly cracked my resolve, but I held steady. She wasn't the one who had wounded me. She was the one I would protect from the fallout. My daughter appeared, her expression stiff. "Dad," she said, polite but cold. "We weren't expecting you." I smiled gently. "Just thought I'd stop by. Bring something for the little one." I handed over a small wrapped package, an old toy from my attic, one I'd saved from her own childhood. Her husband stepped into the room then, his smirk as familiar as the ache in my bones. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes flicking from me to the toy. "You really don't have to keep doing this," he said. "We're managing fine." Managing fine. The words dripped with condescension. I sat quietly for a while, sipping the tea she half-heartedly offered, listening to their small talk. They spoke about plans, vacations, renovations, investments, as though I weren't there. Not once did they ask about my health, my work, my life. I was a ghost in my own family, tolerated out of obligation. When I finally stood to leave, I hugged my granddaughter again and whispered in her ear, "Grandpa will always be here for you." Her smile was my anchor. My daughter walked me to the door, her voice low so her husband wouldn't hear. "Dad, you can't keep coming by like this. We need space." I looked into her eyes, searching for the girl I'd raised. She was there, buried under layers of someone else's influence, someone else's voice. But she didn't speak for herself anymore. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said. "I won't trouble you." As I walked away, the weight in my chest wasn't sorrow, it was clarity. They believed I was nothing more than a fading figure. But soon, they would see the truth. The test was over. The game had begun. The very next morning, I called my lawyer again. "Move forward," I told him. "Everything we discussed, I want it in writing, notarized, filed." My voice carried no hesitation. I was done being a man they dismissed. We met that afternoon in his office. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink, the scent of permanence. He slid the documents across the polished wood desk, explaining each change: the trust dissolved, the will rewritten, the beneficiaries shifted. My daughter's name, once printed in bold letters, was gone. In its place were people who had never turned their backs on me, nieces who called to check in, a godson who'd stayed loyal, charities that had fed children and sheltered veterans. "Are you certain about this?" my lawyer asked again. I looked him in the eye. "She told me she doesn't need me. I'm simply honoring her words." When I signed my name at the bottom of those papers, a weight lifted. Not the weight of loss, but the weight of liberation. For decades, I had carried them, believing my purpose was to provide endlessly. But what they didn't understand was this: I had built more than just a roof and a bank account. I had built independence, foresight, discipline. They thought I was an old man with little left to give. They had no idea how much I still held. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of bourbon, staring at the copies of the documents. My daughter and her husband likely spent their night the way they always did, planning, calculating, imagining a future padded by my sacrifice. They didn't know that future had vanished quietly in the span of a few signatures. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was a calm, steady resolve. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper in the dark, a pen scratching across paper, a door closing softly. And now, the door was closed. The next phase would be watching what happened when they realized it. Weeks passed before the first ripple reached them. I'd expected it to take time, quiet rearrangements rarely shout right away. But when money doesn't arrive where it's expected, when favors suddenly go unanswered, people notice. It started with my son-in-law. I overheard him one afternoon at the local cafe, his voice low but sharp on the phone. "What do you mean the account isn't accessible?" he said, his words cut off when he realized I was nearby. He gave me a stiff nod, tried to play it off, but the tremor in his voice told me everything. Later, my daughter called, her tone carefully casual. "Dad, did you make some changes? The bank said they can't discuss things with me anymore." I let the silence hang a moment. "I thought you didn't need me," I said gently. There was a pause, long enough to hear her swallow. "That's not what I meant. We thought you wanted us to handle things." Her husband's voice hissed in the background, urging her to press harder. But she didn't. She changed the subject quickly, nervous, unsure. That night, I sat with my journal, writing down each shift I noticed. Friends who once orbited around them started calling me instead. Neighbors who'd always greeted them with bright smiles now offered polite but distant nods. My granddaughter still called me whenever she could, her laughter spilling through the receiver like sunlight, but even she sounded confused when plans were cancelled or trips delayed. The cracks were forming. The foundation of their confidence, once so solid, had begun to fracture. They were starting to realize the truth: the security they counted on hadn't come from their own hands. It had come from mine. And now, that foundation belonged to me alone. I poured another drink, leaned back in my chair, and allowed myself the faintest smile. This wasn't about spite, it was about balance. They had pushed me out, told me I wasn't needed. Now they were learning what life truly looked like without me. And it was only the beginning. The call came on a Tuesday evening. My daughter's voice trembled, not with anger this time, but with something I hadn't heard in years: fear. "Dad," she whispered, "we're behind on the mortgage. We thought you were still covering the difference each month." He said it was all handled. Her husband's shadow loomed behind every word. I could almost hear him pacing, urging her not to sound weak, not to beg. But the truth had slipped out. The life they'd built was wobbling, and they didn't know how to steady it. I let her words sink in, then asked calmly, "Do you remember what you told me on my birthday?" Silence. Then a broken, "Dad, please." "I do remember," I continued. "We don't need you anymore. Those were your words. I believed you." Her breath hitched. She tried to say more, but in the background I heard him bark, "Hang up." And she did. For a long time after, I sat staring at the phone. A part of me wanted to call her back, to ease the panic in her voice. But another part, the part that had been dismissed, ignored, tossed aside, knew better. If I rescued them now, the lesson would vanish. They would fall back into arrogance, convinced that I was nothing more than a safety net to be used and discarded. The turning point wasn't their crisis. It was my resolve. The next morning, I called my lawyer again and asked him to finalize the donation transfers. Scholarships, shelters, community programs, people who truly needed help, people who wouldn't spit on a hand that fed them. Every dollar shifted was another cord cut, another bridge burned. That evening, I walked through my house, looking at the framed photos of birthdays past, of holidays filled with laughter. It hurt to see them, yes, but it hurt less than sitting at a table where I was no longer welcome. They had chosen distance. Now they were going to feel the full length of it. And I finally felt free. It wasn't long before their troubles spilled into the open. Small towns don't keep secrets for long, and whispers spread faster than smoke. At the grocery store, I overheard two women at the register. "They're selling furniture," one murmured. "Saw it on the yard with price tags." Times must be rough. Funny, the other replied. Didn't her father always make sure she was taken care of? I paid for my bread and milk, kept my face neutral, but inside I felt the sting of justice unfolding. They had strutted through town, acting as though I was a relic of the past. Now people were starting to connect the dots. The cracks widened when their car disappeared from the driveway, repossessed in the middle of the night. My granddaughter told me on the phone that Daddy was mad at the bank men. I clenched my jaw, fury twisting inside, but not for the bank, for him. For letting his pride drag my daughter and her child into chaos. At work, his co-workers whispered. I know because one of them stopped me at the post office. Is it true? He asked, almost sheepish. Did you cut them off? I looked him straight in the eye. They cut themselves off, I said. I just listened. Soon, even family couldn't ignore it. Cousins called me, curious, cautious. Some accused me of being cold. Others said they admired my resolve. But I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. The truth was simple, a man who's told he's unnecessary doesn't owe anyone an explanation when he finally steps aside. Meanwhile, my daughter's calls grew more frequent, though shorter each time. Her voice wavered between pleading and denial. Dad, it's not what you think, we were just stressed that night, you're still family. But family doesn't tell you you're not needed. Family doesn't smirk while you sit silent at your own birthday dinner. Their unraveling wasn't mine to fix. It was theirs to endure. And I watched, steady as stone, as the image they had tried to project crumbled piece by piece under the weight of their own words. It came on a Sunday, just as I was trimming the hedges in my yard. The sun was sharp overhead, the kind of heat that presses sweat into your shirt, but I hardly noticed it once her car pulled up to the curb. The engine rattled louder than it should have, the paint dulled from neglect. When the door opened, my daughter stepped out slowly, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who ran to me with skinned knees, clutching a broken toy, certain that her father could fix anything. Dad, she began softly, can we talk? I wiped my hands on a rag, the hedge clippers still warm in my grip, and nodded toward the porch. She sat there, fidgeting with her fingers, staring at the boards as though they might offer her the right words. After a long silence, she finally whispered, we're struggling. Things got out of hand. I shouldn't have said what I did on your birthday. I waited, silent, letting her spill whatever truth she could muster. She sighed, her voice catching. But you know how it is, bills piling up, the mortgage slipping, he's been stressed. We've both been stressed. He didn't mean for it to come out that way. We just thought, maybe you could help. Just until we get back on our feet. And there it was, the heart of it. Not an apology. Not real remorse. A plea, dressed in excuses, wrapped in the language of desperation. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. Do you remember the exact words you used that night? Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. You said, we don't need you anymore. That wasn't stress talking. That wasn't a slip. That was a decision, a declaration. And now, because the ground has fallen out from under you, suddenly I'm needed again. Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head. Dad, please. I didn't mean it like that. But I knew better. Words like that don't come from nowhere. They're born in long thoughts, in quiet agreements behind closed doors. For a long while, we sat in silence, the cicadas humming in the distance, her car ticking as the engine cooled. I wanted to reach across, to forgive her, to erase the sting. But forgiveness without change isn't forgiveness, it's just permission to wound again. Finally, I stood, resting my hand on the porch railing. You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think. But don't ask me to save the man who smirked while you told me I wasn't needed. She bowed her head, shoulders shaking, but said nothing more. When she finally left, I watched her car disappear down the street, my chest heavy and my resolve heavier still. That wasn't an apology. It was desperation. And I would not confuse the two. After that Sunday visit, the phone calls came more often. At first, they were polite, filled with strained small talk. Then, as the weeks wore on and their money troubles deepened, the tone shifted. My daughter's voice grew tighter, edged with panic, while her husband's could sometimes be heard in the background, whispering instructions she thought I couldn't catch. One evening, she finally dropped the pretense. "Dad, we need help with the electric bill. They're threatening to shut it off. Just this once, please." I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver tightly. I thought of the countless nights I'd worked overtime, the decades I'd sacrificed so she would never have to hear the word shut off. And now, after all that, she only remembered my worth when the lights threatened to go dark. "I can't," I said firmly. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "Can't, or won't?" "Both," I replied. My voice was steady, even though my heart ached. "You drew the line on my birthday. You told me I wasn't needed. I believed you. Now you're asking me to forget those words because they no longer serve you. But I don't forget." Her breath hitched, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. Instead, she whispered, "So that's it? You'd let your own granddaughter sit in the dark?" The accusation cut deep, but I knew it hadn't come from her, it had come from him, the man who had planted arrogance where gratitude should have been. "I'll never let her suffer," I said, my voice low but resolute. "But don't confuse helping her with rescuing you. Those are not the same thing." There was no reply. Just a hollow silence before the line went dead. That night, I sat on the porch, the autumn wind rattling the dry leaves at my feet. I knew the days ahead would test me more than ever. She was my daughter, flesh of my flesh, but she had chosen her path alongside a man who saw me as nothing but a wallet. The line had been drawn. And I would not step across it again. Winter came early that year, the kind that paints frost on the windows and makes the whole world creak. I spent most evenings by the fire, reading or writing in my journal, my phone resting silent on the table beside me. The calls from my daughter had grown less frequent. When she did ring, her words were short, clipped, rehearsed. I knew it wasn't her voice I was hearing, it was his, spoken through her. Then, just after New Year's, a letter arrived. Not typed. Handwritten. My daughter's penmanship, shaky but familiar. "Dad, I don't know what else to say. We're sorry. We miss you. Things are harder than we ever imagined. Please come back into our lives. Please help us." I read those lines 3 times, then set the letter down. The fire popped in the grate. Outside, the wind howled through the bare branches. And in that moment, I felt both sorrow and clarity. I took out my own pen and a fresh sheet of paper. "My dear daughter," I began, "I will always love you. But love doesn't mean allowing someone to treat me as disposable. On my birthday, you told me I wasn't needed. Those words cannot be undone by struggle or regret. They marked a boundary. They showed me the truth. I will always be here for my granddaughter, but I will no longer carry the weight for you and your husband. That chapter has ended. You must stand on your own now. It is the only way you'll learn what it truly means to value the people who give without asking anything in return." I signed my name, folded the letter, and mailed it the next morning. It was not written in anger, nor in bitterness. It was written in finality. Weeks passed. The silence from her end was deafening, but it did not crush me. Instead, I felt lighter. Free of the endless cycle of sacrifice unappreciated. I tended my garden, joined a local veterans group, even started tutoring kids at the library. My life was no longer centered around being someone else's safety net. It was mine again. And as the months stretched on, I realized something: revenge hadn't been about destroying them. It had been about reclaiming myself. They had cast me aside, and I had shown them what life looked like without me. Not through fury, not through violence, but through absence, the kind that leaves an emptiness money can't fill. In the end, my daughter may never forgive herself. Or perhaps she will, someday, when she truly understands. But I know this much, she will never again look at me and see a man to be dismissed. She will see the father who gave everything, who stepped back when told he wasn't needed, and who finally proved how much he truly was.